Welcome to today's historical deep dive into the mind of a man who redrew maps with the stroke of a pen and the swing of a sword. What if I told you the moment of Napoleon Bonaparte's greatest strength was also the precise instant his fate was sealed? That the architect of modern Europe, the general who seemed invincible, was about to make a gamble so audacious, so steeped in his own perceived inevitability, it would lead to his eventual ruin. It's a story not just of armies clashing, but of the air buzzes not just with the sound of 500,000 men, but with the sheer, terrifying energy of destiny itself. Before you stretches the Grande Armée, a colossal engine of war assembled from every corner of Europe. French cuirassiers gleam, their steel breastplates catching the sun like liquid gold. Polish lancers, eager for their nation's rebirth, shiver with anticipation. German infantry form unwavering lines, their discipline a testament to your reorganizing hand. Italian engineers prepare pontoon bridges, the silent architects of invasion. Flags of a dozen nations snap in the breeze, a kaleidoscope of loyalty, all beneath the shadow of the imperial eagle, your personal standard. This isn't merely an army. It's a continent condensed, a monument forged from sheer will, from years of relentless drive and ambition. Victory stacked upon victory, boundaries redrawn, crowns bestowed like party favors. You have broken empires, humbled emperors, dictated terms from Lisbon to Moscow. The only significant power standing defiant is Russia, and you are here, on the threshold of its vast, enigmatic territory, to bring it to heel. The stakes are absolute, starkly clear. Cement your dominion over Europe, or risk everything on a single, monumental throw of the dice. The sheer scale of the preparation, the meticulous logistics that moved hundreds of thousands of men and horses, tons of supplies, across vast distances. The immensity of the gathered might, it all whispers of inevitability. It screams that this is a force that cannot be stopped. But history, cruel mistress that she is, knows better. This very moment of unparalleled strength, of absolute self-belief, is in fact the precipice of your greatest gamble. A decision born not solely of strategic calculation, but of an overweening confidence, a belief that your will alone can conquer geography, climate, and the sheer stubborn refusal of a people to be subjugated within their own borders. The insight here is stark, chilling. The zenith of power often contains the seed of its own destruction, particularly when success has blinded the leader to the harsh limits of reality. You believe this army is unstoppable because you built it, you command it. You are its brain, its heart, its irresistible force. The reflection is chillingly universal. How often do we, in moments of peak achievement, mistake our temporary mastery over circumstances for an inherent, invincible superiority? We forget the ground we stand on is less solid than we imagine, that external forces, indifferent to our brilliance, still hold sway. You look east, across the dark, flowing water, toward a future you are utterly certain you control. The sound of the river Niemen flows past, indifferent, immutable, a reminder that some things cannot be commanded, only endured. You stand on a raft, moored mid-river on the Niemen, the natural border between empires. It's the summer of 1807, barely weeks after annihilating the Russian army at Friedland. Rain might be falling, or the sun glinting off the water, but the air crackles with something far more potent than weather: power. Here, After years of brutal conflict, you meet Tsar Alexander I, the young, impressionable ruler of the vast Russian Bear. This isn't a surrender. It's a coronation of a different kind, a diplomatic triumph meticulously staged. You extend your hand, a conquering emperor greeting a vanquished yet still formidable peer. Your goal, to charm. And charm you do. Over hours on this raft, then later in the town of Tilsit itself, you talk of restructuring Europe, of shared destinies, of dividing the world. The Ottoman Empire is carved up in conversation, spheres of influence delineated with casual strokes of a pen that feels mightier in this moment than any sword. You whisper dreams of a joint march to India, a fantasy that speaks volumes about the scale of your ambition. No longer just master of Europe, but a potential world shaper, coordinating continents from your dinner table. This dazzling display isn't just politics, it's a profound personal transformation. Having tasted absolute military victory, and now experiencing this kind of diplomatic dominance, a dangerous conviction solidifies within you. You begin to believe that personal relationships, your own undeniable charisma, and the sheer force of your big-picture vision can somehow override the messy, deeply rooted realities of national interests, historical animosities, and the simmering resentments of conquered populations. You trust your ability to persuade Alexander, to bind him to your will through personality and shared vision, just as much as you trust the devastating power of your Grand Army. The deeper insight born at Tilsit is this: the intoxicating delusion of powerful leaders who come to believe their personal magnetism, their strategic genius, transcends the complex, often irrational tides of geopolitics and human nature. You walked away from that raft, not just with the Treaty of Tilsit, a temporary alliance that isolated Britain, but with a fixed idea. Russia, despite its size and unique character, was a piece you could shift and control on your grand European chessboard, simply because you had charmed its Tsar. Ask yourself, was this the height of diplomatic brilliance, seeing potential allies where others saw only enemies? Or was it the first fatal blossom of hubris, mistaking a personal connection for fundamental, unshakable geopolitical alignment? The seeds of future conflict, ironically, were sown in this moment of apparent peace and shared ambition. You are a young officer in revolutionary France, fueled by a burning resentment that feels hotter than any battlefield fire. It's 1793. The nation is tearing itself apart, and chaos reigns supreme. You arrive at Toulon, a vital port seized by royalist rebels and protected by the formidable British fleet, an impossible knot tied by incompetence and indecision. You see the generals bickering, their plans dissolving like mist, their minds trapped in outdated tactics. But you see something else. You see the strategic high ground, a promontory known as Little Gibraltar, the key that can unlock the entire siege, trapping the enemy fleet like a wounded beast. This isn't just a military problem, it's a stage. You step forward, bypassing rank and protocol with a boldness that borders on audacity. You devise a plan, simple, direct, brutal, focusing every available cannon on that single crucial point. You rally the weary troops, your conviction a stark contrast to the surrounding apathy. There's a subtle, almost humorous irony in it. The very chaos of the revolution, meant to empower the masses, creates the vacuum where a single, determined will can seize control. You execute your plan with ruthless efficiency, driving home every attack ignoring casualties, knowing this is the moment. The forts fall, the cannons are turned on the trapped British ships, and the fleet is forced to flee, their tails tucked, leaving Toulon to the Republic. This is your spark, your first major success. But more than proving your tactical genius, Toulon ignites something deeper within you. It's not just that you succeeded, it's how it felt. Surrounded by indecision and failure, you saw the path, you forced the action, you achieved the impossible. In that crucible, a belief hardens. You are different. You are chosen. A singular purpose takes root, a destiny that feels palpable, a force driving you forward when others faltered. Ask yourself, was this the birth of genius, or the moment an unshakable, perhaps dangerous, self-belief began to calcify? This early, dramatic victory forged a conviction powerful enough to move mountains, essential for overcoming initial obstacles. But here, too, is the seed of the blind spot, the double-edged sword of absolute certainty. The power it gives to achieve the improbable, yes, but also the inability to admit you might, just possibly, be wrong. December 2nd, 1804. The air inside Notre Dame Cathedral is thick with incense and history. Every eye in the packed basilica is fixed on you. You are Napoleon, first consul, soon to be emperor. Pope Pius VII sits ready, the symbol of centuries of divine right, of power flowing down from the heavens through the church to earthly rulers. You have orchestrated this spectacle with painstaking detail, a blending of ancient ritual and revolutionary assertion. The moment arrives. You walk the aisle, clad in robes of state, the imperial crown, heavy with jewels and meaning, nearby. As Pius VII raises his hands, preparing to perform the sacred, age-old act of coronation, you reach out. Not hesitantly, but with a swift, decisive motion. You take the crown from his hands. The collective gasp is almost audible, a ripple of shock and understanding through the assembly. You don't wait for legitimacy to be bestowed by clergy or tradition. You turn, face the congregation, and place the crown firmly upon your own head. Then you crown Empress Josephine. But the message has already been delivered. This act is pure distilled Napoleon. It's a rejection of divine right, a declaration that your power flows solely from your own will, your own achievements, your own unmatched ambition. You are the architect of your destiny, the self-made emperor. This wasn't just about wearing the crown. It was about controlling the symbol of receiving it. It reveals a profound insight into your drive, a relentless craving not just for ultimate power, but for the performance of ultimate power. You needed the world to see you as the sole source of your elevation, the single force lifting yourself to the pinnacle. Yet look closer. Is this supreme confidence? Or does this dramatic, almost desperate assertion of control reveal a lurking insecurity? A fear that if legitimacy wasn't seized violently and publicly, it might never truly be yours? You needed to constantly validate your position, not just through victory on the battlefield, but through symbolic gestures that defied millennia of tradition. The performance of power can become as important, perhaps even more consuming, than its substance. It's a dangerous path, one that can distract you from the immense responsibilities that come with absolute rule, substituting drama for durable foundation. Consider the weight of that crown, placed there by your own hand. Ask yourself, was this the ultimate assertion of sovereign independence? Or the first public display of a man who believed his own myth so completely he forgot the ground beneath him? What would it take for you, standing in his boots that day, to perform such an act? The smoke clears from the fields of Austerlitz and Jena Auerstedt, and you stand over the map of Europe. It is not merely a collection of lines and colors now. It is clay waiting to be molded. You see kingdoms rise and fall at your command. Ancient states are abolished, dynasties swept aside. In their place, you carve out new entities, the Confederation of the Rhine, a network loyal to Paris, the Kingdom of Westphalia, given to your brother Jerome, Naples and Spain, reserved for Joseph, Holland for Louis. You are not just a conqueror. You are a geographer of power, redrawing the continent with swift, authoritative strokes. Your family, your marshals, they become kings and princes tasked with enforcing your will from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. This belief in the absolute power of decree extends beyond borders and thrones. Your gaze turns across the Channel to Great Britain, the stubborn island that defies your dominance. You conceive the continental system, an economic weapon of unprecedented scale. Every port from Portugal to the Baltics under your control, or the control of your allies, must close its doors to British trade. You envision an iron ring tightening around their necks, starving their commerce, crippling their navy, forcing them to their knees without landing a single soldier on their shores. The insight here is breathtakingly simple in its ambition. You genuinely believe that political and economic reality can be entirely reshaped by sheer will. Codified into law and backed by military might, it is the ultimate expression of my way or the highway, applied to entire continents, entire economies. You decree prosperity by blocking trade routes you don't control. You dictate commerce through military occupation. But here lies the tragic irony, the profound blindness in this vision of absolute control. You fail to account for the smuggler on a foggy coast, the merchant who needs British goods to survive, the resentment brewing in the hearts of nations whose livelihoods you are crushing. You can conquer armies, shatter empires, but you cannot conquer human nature's need to trade, nor its deep-seated desire for independence. You cannot legislate away geography or economics. The system meant to starve Britain instead starves the continent, breeding defiance and corruption in your own ranks and among your allies. The limits of force in controlling complex human systems begin to become starkly, tragically clear. Ask yourself, was this the pinnacle of strategic brilliance, using every tool at your disposal? Or was it the blinding glare of hubris, believing the map was the territory, and your word was economic law? You sit in the grand study at the Tuileries, a kingdom of polished mahogany and maps of a continent bent to your will. The air hangs thick with the scent of ink and burning logs, a false warmth against the chill that already whispers from the east. One by one they come, your most trusted advisors, the men who bled for your victories, the allies tied to your destiny. They speak of Russia, not in terms of conquest, but in warnings. Your seasoned marshals, veterans of 100 battles, shift uncomfortably. They speak of distance, of supply lines stretching to the breaking point over desolate plains. They mention the Tsar's likely strategy: avoid pitched battle, retreat, burn. L'Empereur, it is too vast, Murat might murmur, his usual fire dampened by a rare caution. Their army may vanish like smoke in the snow. You nod, but the nods are perfunctory. You see their hesitation not as strategic insight, but as a lack of your own relentless will. They have grown comfortable. Perhaps soft. The Polish delegation arrives next, their faces etched with concern for their own precarious state. They know the roads, the swamps, the harshness of their eastern borderlands that will be your army's path. They warn of logistics, of foraging in lands already stripped bare by previous wars, of the sheer, soul-crushing scale of moving 500,000 men, horses, and cannons across such unforgiving terrain. Their voices carry the weight of ancestral memory, of winters that swallow armies whole. You listen, but their practical fears seem small against the towering architecture of your ambition. They lack your vision, your belief that destiny bends to the will of genius. And then there is Talleyrand, your infinitely subtle, infinitely wary foreign minister, whose quiet opposition has become a constant, unnerving hum beneath the symphony of your power. He doesn't argue tactics or logistics. He speaks of the folly, the fundamental error in antagonizing a power that cannot be truly conquered, only endured. He senses the shift in the global balance, the limits even to your unprecedented force. He sees this not just as a military gamble, but as a profound political and existential risk. He offers no loud protest, only a cool, reasoned dismantling of the entire premise. It is the voice of Cassandra, speaking uncomfortable truth into a hall determined to hear only prophecy of victory. You hear them all. Every word registers. Vast, winter, retreat, supplies, folly. Yet you don't hear them. Not in a way that penetrates the fortifications you've built around your certainty. Their counsel isn't weighed. It's deflected. Why? Because their doubts echo the few, faint doubts you refuse to acknowledge within yourself. The terrifying scale of the enterprise, the chilling possibility of failure, the sheer audacious gamble, these are whispers you silence internally with the roar of past triumphs and the blinding light of your perceived destiny. When others voice these same whispers, you must silence them too, outwardly dismissing them as faint-hearted or disloyal to reinforce your own besieged conviction. This is the insidious power of the echo chamber. Not just of sycophants who tell you what you want to hear, but of your own mind, filtering out anything that contradicts your desired reality. You interpret caution as cowardice, strategic concerns as lack of faith in your genius, reasoned opposition as subtle sabotage. You have become so invested in the narrative of Napoleon the Invincible, the man who always finds a way, that any input suggesting limitations feels like an attack on the very core of your identity. Ask yourself, was this strategic analysis or the fatal arrogance of a man who had won too much? Was it believing in his army's capabilities? Or simply refusing to confront the magnitude of the challenge, projecting his internal need for invincibility onto the map? It is a moment where personal psychology begins to dictate grand strategy, where the leader's internal landscape warts the external reality he commands. The warnings dissipate, unheard, swallowed by the rising tide of a will determined to have its way, no matter the cost, written in the frost-hardened earth. The path to the Berezina begins not with the first step across the Niemen, but in this room, with words left unspoken or utterly dismissed. Before you stands the Grand Army. Before you flows the Niemen River, the border with Russia. This is it. 600,000 men, arrayed across the landscape, cavalry glittering, infantry forming vast, dark blocks, artillery a fearsome, silent promise. You look upon this sea of humanity, gathered from every corner of your empire, and feel a surge of power unlike any other. Never before in Europe has such a force been assembled under one banner. You didn't just assemble this army, you built it, piece by meticulously planned piece. Every corps assigned its route, every supply depot mapped, every commander given his role. You drew on the resources of conquered kingdoms, the manpower of allied states, the veterans of your own core legions. You believe with absolute certainty that sheer numbers, overwhelming force, will guarantee victory. This is not merely an army, it is a statement. A hammer designed to crush all resistance, to intimidate the enemy into submission before the decisive battle even begins. Your history, your brilliance, lies in rapid concentration, in bringing veteran forces to bear at the critical point. You've done it with 30,000, with 60,000, crushing foes at Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram. You see this merely as a scaling up, a linear extrapolation of proven success. If 60,000 can win a battle, surely 600,000 can win a war. But this is different, profoundly, catastrophically different. Here lies the subtle, tragic irony. Your greatest strength, the ability to conceptualize, organize, and command vast forces, is about to become your undoing. The belief that tactics proven effective for 60,000 men apply equally to 10 times that number is the illusion. It is the hubris of believing that complexity scales linearly. A single horse requires forage. 200,000 horses create a logistical catastrophe. One wagon train can follow a road. Thousands clog arteries, break down bridges, and require security across hundreds of miles. The administrative burden isn't 10 times harder. It's arguably 100 times, perhaps 1,000 times more complex. Think of the languages spoken in this grand army: French, German, Italian, Polish, Dutch, Swiss, Spanish, Portuguese. Think of the varied loyalties, the different training doctrines. Think of the sheer, monumental effort required simply to feed this moving city every single day, hundreds of miles from your base. You have mistaken the potential power of numbers, the awe they inspire, for guaranteed operational effectiveness. You have ignored the inherent fragility of such an enormous, multinational entity operating far from its familiar, fertile heartland. This fascination with having the biggest or the most, the largest army, the largest empire, has overshadowed the practical realities of management, adaptability, and resilience. It's like building the tallest skyscraper without considering the foundation or the wind resistance. Sometimes being too big doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you a bigger, easier target, more susceptible to collapse under its own weight, more rigid when flexibility is needed. You look at the immense power, the sheer volume of men and materiel, and fail to see the 1,000 points of potential failure hidden within the scale itself. This is the moment where ambition transcends pragmatism, where the dream of overwhelming might blinds you to the administrative nightmare you are marching into. Ask yourself, was this strategic brilliance in marshaling unprecedented resources, or a fundamental misunderstanding of the very nature of scale and complexity? What would you have done, standing there on the riverbank, looking not just at the might, but at the logistical shadow cast by 600,000 men? June 24, 1812, the first great surge of the Grand Army touches the eastern bank. 3 pontoon bridges span the Niemen near Kovno. temporary arteries pulsating with life. The drums roll, the fifes play, martial music meant to herald a glorious invasion. But as the first corps, a colossal wave of humanity and steel, steps onto Russian soil, there is nothing. No Cossack cavalry on the horizon. No roar of cannon answering their crossing. No desperate defense of the riverbank. Just empty space, stretching infinitely eastward. The trees stand silent sentinels. The fields are bare. It's not the expected clash of titans. It's an anticlimax of chilling proportions, a silent invitation into a waiting void. This crossing, devoid of glorious battle, is perhaps more terrifying in its quiet finality. It's the point of no return, marked not by blood and thunder, but by an unnerving absence. The vast, theoretical machine, planned and assembled with meticulous detail, is now a force unleashed, committed fully to the Russian vastness. There is no turning back now. Momentum becomes destiny. For a leader like Napoleon, defined by forward motion, retreat isn't just strategically difficult. The logistical nightmare is immense. It's psychologically almost impossible. His identity, his power, is predicated on the relentless advance. To falter, to step backward, is to contradict the very essence of his being. This silent crossing is the ultimate double down, placing an unbearable amount of capital, the lives of 500,000 men, the resources of an empire, on a single, perilous outcome. Consider the difference between planning a risky venture and taking that first irreversible step into the unknown. On a map, lines can be redrawn, strategies adjusted, but on the ground, under a silent, indifferent sky, stepping over that boundary transforms theory into horrifying reality. The quiet absence of an enemy here isn't a good sign. It's the first subtle confirmation of the unheeded warnings. Russia isn't defending the river. Russia is absorbing the blow, luring you deeper into its immensity. Was this calculated risk, or a descent into inevitable consequence? What would you feel, standing there amongst the soldiers, hearing the music fade into the vast silence? The commitment is made, not with a bang, but with an unnerving hush. You are in Russia now. The long march has begun. Months pass on the endless Russian plains. You march deeper and deeper, the sun relentless at first. Then the air begins to hold a chill that promises worse to come. You expected a grand battle, a decisive moment on some vast field near Vilnius or Smolensk, where the might of the Grande Armée would shatter the Russian will. But that moment never comes. Instead, the Russian army retreats, a ghost slipping further into the east. They leave behind not cities to conquer, but burned villages, scorched fields, a barren land offering no quarter, no sustenance. Your vast supply lines, the veins feeding this colossal body, stretch thin and fragile across hundreds of miles. Like persistent gnats, Cossack light cavalry materializes from the horizon, harassing, cutting, vanishing before you can swat them away. The carefully planned logistical miracle begins to fray. Food becomes scarce, then meager, then a desperate hunt. Water sources are fouled or empty. The sheer scale of the operation, designed for a swift, crushing blow, becomes a liability. Disease, the oldest enemy of armies, finds fertile ground in the weakened ranks. Dysentery and typhus march alongside you, thinning the columns more effectively than any cannonade. Then comes desertion. Soldiers who joined for glory and plunder, see only hardship and death stretching into infinity. They melt away, heading west, back towards something resembling civilization. The anticipated swift campaign dissolves into a grueling attritional march into a void. You chase an enemy that refuses to be caught. Across a landscape that actively conspires against you. This grinding reality reveals a stark, painful truth. Ambition, when untethered from a flexible strategy, when it refuses to acknowledge the enemy's agency and the brutal realities of geography and logistics, becomes a form of chasing a mirage. You expected them to fight on your terms, on a battlefield chosen by you, but they refused. They chose space, time, and denial. Your rigid, brilliant plan, honed on the battlefields of Europe, crumbles against their fluid defense and the sheer indifferent vastness of Russia. Was this the ultimate trap sprung by a cunning foe? Or was it the trap you built for yourself, cornered by an ambition that couldn't conceive of failure, that couldn't adapt when the enemy didn't play by the rules? The reflection burns. True strength lies not just in imposing your will, in forcing reality to conform to your desires, but in adapting, rapidly and ruthlessly, to circumstances you cannot control, to an enemy whose choices dismantle your assumptions. An enemy that refuses to fight is a strategic puzzle your purely military mind, so used to seeking battle, struggles to solve. You are a master of the chessboard, but this is not a game on a board. It is a struggle against the very land itself, and the spirit of a people you thought you could simply force into submission. September 7th, 1812. The sun struggles to pierce the damp air over Borodino. Before you, the Russian army finally stands their ground. After weeks of a frustrating, elusive chase across endless plains, they offer battle. A massive, entrenched force positioned on ridges and behind earthworks. This is the moment you've craved. The decisive confrontation to shatter the Tsar's will and end this ruinous campaign. You survey the vast lines, two immense machines poised for collision, the silence before the storm, thick with anticipation. Then the cannons roar. For hours they pound, a relentless, deafening pulse across the landscape. Thousands of guns tear through the morning mist, turning fields into slaughterhouses. Men charge redoubts, bayonets clash in brutal, close-quarters fighting. The battle devolves into a meat grinder, consuming soldiers at an horrifying rate. You see the reports, the staggering casualty counts climbing throughout the day. This is not just a battle. It's a blood sacrifice on an industrial scale. As the day wears on, and pockets of desperate resistance hold, you face a crucial decision. Your elite Imperial Guard, your ultimate reserve, stands waiting, committing them now, throwing their disciplined weight into the faltering Russian lines, could potentially break them, turn the tactical victory into total annihilation. But the cost you've already paid weighs heavily. Your army is bleeding white. The sheer spectacle of the carnage before you, perhaps for the first time, makes you hesitate. Is the prize worth sacrificing this final, irreplaceable asset? Or is there a lingering hope that the Russians, battered beyond recognition, will simply crumble under the pressure? You hold them back. This decision, or perhaps non-decision, is a pivot point. The Russians, though decimated, do not break. They cling to their positions with a stubbornness born of defending their homeland. Your forces achieve a tactical victory. The field is yours. The enemy eventually withdraws, but it feels profoundly hollow. Purchased at a crippling price, tens of thousands of your best men lie dead or wounded. The Russian army, though mangled, is not annihilated. They retreat, yes, but in order, their fighting spirit unbroken. Borodino offers a brutal, undeniable truth. Winning a battle is not always winning the war, especially when the cost is unsustainable and the enemy, though battered, lives to fight another day. It is a testament to immense courage and sacrifice on both sides, a grim ballet of death. But it drains your army's lifeblood without delivering the decisive blow you desperately needed to force peace. Ask yourself, was holding back the guard prudent conservation of your core strength, recognizing the unbearable cost? Or was it a fatal moment of indecision, a hesitation born of witnessing the sheer horror, preventing you from securing the very outcome the battle was meant to achieve? The reflection is stark. The difference between tactical success driven by ego, by the need to force a confrontation, and strategic wisdom, which might have dictated finding a less costly path, or recognizing that sometimes the greatest victory is the one you find a way not to fight. This bloody field near Moscow is where the unstoppable force met the immovable object, and both were irrevocably broken. You ride into the city a week after the bloodbath at Borodino, the air thick with the phantom smell of smoke, even before you see the flames. Moscow, the ancient heart of Russia. Months of grueling march, sacrifice, and battle have led you here. You anticipate a different kind of arrival. Delegations bowing, terms of surrender being drafted, the symbolic weight of holding the enemy's sacred capital settling upon your shoulders like a new, ultimate mantle. This is the prize. This is the culmination. But silence greets you first. An unnerving stillness hangs over the vast wooden city. It is largely deserted, a ghost town painted on a grand canvas. Where are the boyars? Where are the keys to the city? You find only emptiness, echoes, and a growing sense of unease. This is not the triumphant entry you envisioned. It feels like stepping onto a stage after the performance has ended, the audience gone, the props left scattered. This absence is the first chilling sign that the nature of your victory is profoundly wrong. Then the smoke begins. Thin tendrils at first, rising from scattered points across the horizon. Innocent chimney smoke? No. Too many, too quickly, too deliberate. They become plumes, then walls of fire. The wooden city, a tinderbox waiting for a spark, erupts around you. Whether lit by retreating Russians determined to deny you refuge and resources, or accidentally ignited by careless soldiers, the result is devastatingly effective. Moscow consumes itself in a self-immolation of defiance. You watch, perhaps from the Kremlin, as your grand prize turns to ashes. The strategic objective, taking the enemy's capital, is technically achieved. Yet it offers you nothing. No political leverage, because there is no one significant to surrender or negotiate. No supplies, as they are either gone or burning. No shelter, as the city becomes a furnace, then a frozen ruin. The very symbol you craved, the objective that drove your forces across vast distances, is rendered useless, a monument to futility. This burning city is a harsh, undeniable mirror reflecting the core flaw in this campaign, perhaps in your very ambition. You grasped for the symbol, the capital, while neglecting the reality, the enemy's will to resist, the logistical nightmare of feeding and sheltering a massive army hundreds of miles from home, and the simple, brutal fact that taking ground means nothing if it offers no sustenance or strategic advantage. You stand amidst the smoldering ruins of what you thought you wanted, the acrid smoke stinging your eyes, and the bitter truth settling in your gut. You achieved a goal, yes, but gained an empty victory. Ask yourself, what kind of triumph is this? Is capturing a crown meaningful if the kingdom is set alight around you? What would you have done, standing in his boots, realizing the prize was poison and the cold, unforgiving Russian winter was fast approaching the ruin you now occupied? It's a stark, visual lesson in the peril of prioritizing symbolic conquest over practical reality. A stark illustration of how ambition, unchecked by pragmatic foresight, can lead you not to glory, but to ruin. You took Moscow, and Moscow took everything else. You linger in the ruins of Moscow for over a month, a bizarre period of paralysis settling over the wreckage. Your grand army, which marched across a continent, is now a ghost of itself, huddled amidst the skeletal remains of the Tsar's holy city. You send message after message to Alexander, expecting, demanding that he sue for peace now that his ancient capital has fallen. Surely he must capitulate. But silence answers you. Only the wind whistles through the burnt-out mansions, indifferent to your imperial will. Your army's strength dwindles daily, not from battle, but from the insidious enemies of disease, starvation, and the crushing psychological toll of inaction in this vast, hostile wasteland. The golden domes of the Kremlin offer no warmth, no sustenance, only a hollow victory. Each passing day is a drop of blood from the veins of your forces. You wait, clinging to the belief that Alexander must break, that the sight of his burning city is a wound too deep for any ruler to bear without surrender. This delay, this stagnant month, reveals a critical, brutal insight into the very nature of your leadership at its height. The chilling inability of a mind so driven by ego and preconception to adapt its plan when the expected outcome utterly fails to materialize. You were so utterly convinced that taking Moscow equaled inevitable victory, that the enemy would surrender, that you simply could not conceive of the alternative. You were trapped, not by Russian soldiers or winter snows yet, but by your own absolute conviction. You waited, frozen in place, for a signal that would never come, squandering precious weeks, time that history would prove agonizingly critical. The reflection here is stark. Stubbornness, when born of pride and an unwillingness to accept the failure of one's grand design, can be the most insidious enemy of all. It blinds you, saps your strength, and leaves you exposed. Sometimes, the hardest action, the most strategically vital move, is admitting your initial premise was wrong. It means changing course, even when it demands abandoning a cherished, hard-won goal like the capture of Moscow. You held the city, but in waiting for a peace that existed only in your mind, you began to lose everything. Ask yourself, when has your own certainty become a cage? What would it take for you to pivot, to admit the plan failed, standing here in the ashes of this Pyrrhic victory? The conqueror waits for the conquered to yield, but the silence in Moscow is louder than any cannon, screaming the truth. Your move did not produce the desired result. And now, the true enemy, the Russian winter, begins to stir. a silent, unstoppable force unimpressed by your presence in its realm. Mid-October, 1812, the air bites sharp, carrying the first delicate dustings of snow that swirl around the deserted palaces and empty streets of Moscow. You have lingered, hoping for a surrender that will never come, a peace treaty from a Tsar who has vanished into the vastness of his land. Hope, thin as the October light, finally breaks. Reluctance is a bitter taste in your mouth, but necessity is a brutal master. The order is given. Retreat. Your grand army, once a vibrant ribbon of power stretching across Europe, is now a fragile line. You pin your hopes on a different path back, a southern route, untouched by the outward march, promising untapped villages, fresh supplies, salvation from the desolation you yourself created. It is a gamble born of desperation, a turn away from the scorched earth you traversed to reach this cold, hollow victory. The army turns, faces south, seeking warmth and sustenance where only ruin lies behind. But Russia has other plans. Just south of the ravaged route, at the town of Maloyaroslavets, the path is blocked. A fierce, brutal battle erupts. Italian soldiers, fighting for an emperor far from their sun-drenched homes, clash violently with Russian lines, determined to prevent your escape down a more fertile road. It is a close-fought, desperate struggle in the freezing mud and nascent snow. Your forces prevail technically, taking the town, but the cost is horrific. The Russian resistance proves they can stop you, will contest this southern passage. They force you to acknowledge a terrible truth. This route is not open, not safe, and attempting to fight your way through this resistance would be a costly, perhaps fatal delay. The choice is stark, unforgiving. Turn back onto the devastated northern route you came by. The path where villages were plundered dry on the way in, where bridges were burned, where supply depots were exhausted or non-existent. It is the path of ghosts and scavengers. The army turns again, faces northwest, towards Smolensk and the faint promise of relief. This moment, the pivot back onto the path of ruin, marks the true beginning of the end. The retreat is no longer a strategic withdrawal. It becomes a death march. As the army trudges onto the familiar, desolate road, the Russian winter descends in full, terrible fury. The first snowflakes become a relentless blizzard. The sharp air, a deep, piercing cold that steals breath and numbs hope. Temperatures plummet, dropping far below zero, turning the march into a frozen nightmare. Men, already weakened by hunger and exhaustion, succumb by the hundreds, then the thousands. The elaborate columns disintegrate into desperate, shivering crowds. This is the devastating consequence phase, the brutal, undeniable insight that nature and logistics are indifferent to even the grandest human ambitions. The Grand Army, the instrument forged from years of victories, built on the momentum of conquest and the confidence of invincibility, disintegrates under the relentless assault of cold, gnawing hunger and persistent harassment from Cossack raiders harrying the flanks. Your carefully constructed world, built on the power of will and military genius, crumbles, revealing the shocking fragility hidden beneath the glittering facade of imperial power. Ask yourself, was the initial southern attempt strategic foresight or a last, desperate act of denial? The reflection hammered home by every frozen corpse is simple, yet profound. The most ambitious plans, The most brilliant strategies are meaningless if they fail to account for the most basic, undeniable forces: climate, geography, human endurance. The very earth you sought to conquer proved a more formidable foe than any army you had ever faced. The snow, the ice, the sheer emptiness of the landscape. They didn't need cannons or cavalry. They simply were, and that was enough. Late November, 1812. The Berezina River. The air is a frozen blade, the water choked with ice floes. Russian armies, sensing the kill, converge like wolves from north and south. They aim to trap the remnants of your Grande Army against this unforgiving barrier. Survival hangs by a thread, a desperate gamble on human will against impossible odds. You watch the scene unfold, a tableau painted in white snow, dark water, and the red of blood. Thousands of shivering, starving soldiers huddle on the bank, a ragged, desperate throng. The only hope rests on the sappers, the engineers, plunging into the near-freezing water. Under relentless enemy fire, these men, already exhausted and skeletal, perform a feat of almost unimaginable bravery. They work knee-deep, chest-deep, building pontoon bridges from scavenged timber. Their hands are raw, their breath mist in the sub-zero air, each hammered nail a defiance of death. It is heroism on a scale rarely witnessed, a profound testament to loyalty and courage, even when faced with utter ruin. Yet, this immense courage is born of a catastrophic strategic failure. The Berezina is not just a river. It is a chasm between your grand vision and the terrible reality inflicted upon the men who followed you. The crossing is a funnel of death. As more soldiers pour onto the fragile structures, as the enemy cannons pound and the banks become a chaotic nightmare, the bridges creak, splinter, and ultimately are cut. Thousands are left behind. They face capture, hypothermia, or drowning in the ice-filled current. The screams echoing across the frozen landscape are the sound of ambition's ultimate cost. This river becomes a stark, frozen symbol. It reflects the cold calculation of ambition, the drive for glory that led so many to this horrific end. The heroism of the sappers underscores a brutal truth: the cost paid by the many for the mistakes of the one. You see the immense courage, yes, but you also see the chilling consequence of leadership that plans campaigns but forgets the brutal arithmetic of retreat, of men, and of ice-choked rivers. Ask yourself, was the building of those bridges a testament to your soldier's spirit, or the ultimate indictment of a general who placed them in such an inescapable trap? What does it say about leadership when the greatest bravery is only needed because of the gravest error? The frozen Berezina offers a reflection as clear and unforgiving as the ice itself. Leadership is not merely about having a vision. It is, fundamentally, about the solemn, inescapable responsibility for the lives entrusted to you. And at Berezina, that responsibility is measured in the thousands left behind, fading into the white wilderness. Early December, 1812. The world you forged in fire and ambition is crumbling around you in the unforgiving snows of Russia. The Grand Army, once the spearhead of your empire, is a phantom limb, a ragged, frost-bitten procession shuffling through an endless white void. You see them, the hollow eyes, the torn uniforms, the desperate animal fight for warmth and a scrap of food. Near the Lithuanian village of Smordony, a brutal calculation hardens in your mind. You stand amidst this wreckage, not as one of the suffering masses, but as the architect whose grand design collapsed. This is the moment you decide to abandon the physical shell of the army. It feels like a betrayal, a king fleeing the field while his pawns freeze. Yet, the strategic imperative, delivered with chilling clarity, is undeniable. You must get back to Paris, incognito, at breakneck speed across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Why? To control the narrative of this unprecedented disaster before it spins into political chaos back home. To raise a new army, the only means you have left to salvage anything from this ruin. You leave Marshal Murat, your brother-in-law, in nominal command of the dying remnants, a task less about leadership and more about presiding over a mass burial. This decision lays bare the brutal, almost alienating logic of absolute power. At your absolute lowest military ebb, facing the annihilation of your primary instrument of control, your focus snaps instantly, not to the immediate suffering of the soldiers around you, but to the preservation of the source of that power, your throne, your political standing, your capacity to rebuild. It is a chilling insight into the calculations made at history's summit. While raising a new army was undeniably necessary for the survival of the empire, the act of leaving the dying feels like a conscious choice to prioritize the gilded cage of the Tuileries over the frozen trenches of the retreat. You outran the physical collapse, leaving it behind in the snowdrifts of Eastern Europe. But you could not outrun the judgment of history, nor the silent, freezing memory of the thousands you left behind. The calculation was logical, strategic, maybe even necessary for the abstract concept of the empire. But what does it say about the human cost of such leadership? Ask yourself, when the very foundation of your power is threatened, does the survival of the throne automatically outweigh the shared suffering of those who held it up? What does this moment reveal about the lonely, often ruthless bargain struck by those who grasp for ultimate control? You traded shared hardship for strategic speed, but in the grand ledger of legacy, was the calculation ultimately worth the cost? The Allied armies, a tide of nations you once bent to your will, surge across the borders. It is 1813, then 1814, and the continent you sculpted with cannons and codes is reclaiming its shape, often with blunt force. You orchestrate tactical miracles at Lutzen, at Bautzen, at Montmirail. You conjure victories from raw conscripts, boys barely old enough to shave, thrown into the maelstrom against veterans hardened by years of fighting you. You are the maestro of movement, the alchemist turning desperate scraps into fleeting triumph. But the sheer weight is crushing. It is not just armies you face. It is the cumulative resentment, the exhausted patience of monarchs and peoples who have learned the brutal cost of your boundless ambition. You are a chess master playing against 20 opponents simultaneously, each piece on their board animated by a unified, burning desire for your defeat. The struggle becomes less about grand strategy and more about survival, a desperate rearguard action across the very landscapes where you forged your legend. Paris falls. The capital, the heart of the empire, is occupied. The news reaches you at Fontainebleau, a palace echoing with past glories and present dread. Here is the ultimate checkmate, not delivered by a foreign foe directly, but by the very men you elevated, the marshals forged in the white heat of your early campaigns, now weary, disillusioned, and crucially, realistic. They stand before you, not with reverence, but with cold, hard truth. The army is dissolving. The will to fight is broken. They demand the unthinkable: abdication. It is a mutiny of loyalty, a council of war turned into an intervention. These are the faces that watched you conquer, the hands that held your standards high. Now, they are the hands holding the pen, forcing it into yours. The air in Fontainebleau is thick with betrayal, not just by them, but by the circumstances you yourself created. You, the architect of empires, find your own foundation crumbling from within. You sign the document, the act witnessed by silent walls and the ghosts of triumphs past. The emperor of the French, the king of Italy, the ruler of a dominion stretching from Spain to Poland, is erased with a stroke of ink. You are reduced, by a cruel twist of fate and the pen of your former servant, to the sovereign of the island of Elba. Elba, a scrap of rock in the Mediterranean. The title itself is a biting, almost sarcastic commentary on your fall. Sovereign of a place that takes hours, not months to traverse. Sovereign of a few thousand inhabitants, not 70 million subjects. It is a cage, small and desolate, for an eagle whose wings once spanned a continent. This is the brutal, undeniable consequence of your overreach. The empire built on the precarious edge of continuous victory, sustained by the force of your personality and the fear you inspired, proves inherently unstable. It was a structure lacking true depth of foundation in popular consent or lasting alliances. When the illusion of your invincibility cracked, first in the snows of Russia, then under the combined weight of Europe, the entire edifice collapsed with terrifying speed. You sit on Elba, watching the waves, the vast, boundless sea, a mocking reminder of the boundless ambition you can no longer exercise. For the first time in decades, you are truly alone with your thoughts, stripped of the endless demands, the strategic calculations, the constant performance of power. You are left with only the reflection on how far you have fallen, from master of Europe to monarch of a molehill. The painful insight is unavoidable. Power, seized by will, maintained by force, is a magnificent yet fragile construct. It lasts only as long as the will is unbroken and the force unchallenged. When the tide turns, the structure yields, not with a slow decay, but a swift, catastrophic implosion. Ask yourself, was the fall inevitable once the limits of expansion were ignored? What wisdom is there in knowing when to stop climbing? You sit on St. Helena, a rock in the South Atlantic, the final inescapable prison. The waves crash against the shore, a constant, indifferent roar. The grand army, the vast empire, the dreams of universal dominion, they are all gone, dissolved like mist in the morning sun. What remains is the story, the legend, and the chilling lesson etched into the annals of history. This isolated outpost, this geological footnote, becomes the ultimate stage for reflection. The principle laid bare by your trajectory, from the crossing of the Niemen, that audacious leap into the Russian abyss, to this lonely exile, is the perilous dance between audacious ambition and the cold, hard limits of reality. You proved, beyond any doubt, that singular will and genius could shake the very foundations of the world, reshaping maps and shattering ancient dynasties. But you also proved that the failure to recognize external constraints, the brutal indifference of geography, the unpredictable fury of climate, the stubborn, resilient will of others, the simple, undeniable laws of logistics and human endurance ultimately turns boundless potential into catastrophic ruin. Your overconfidence, forged in the furnace of unparalleled victories and fueled by a messianic belief in your own destiny, led you to attempt the truly impossible. And in doing so, lose absolutely everything. It wasn't just Russia that defeated you. It was the unchecked inflation of your own perceived power, the silent, insidious hubris that told you the fundamental rules of the world didn't apply to you. It is history's cruelest irony. The man who mastered the battlefield was ultimately defeated by forces he deemed beneath his notice. History offers no easy answers, only patterns, echoes across the centuries. What happens when modern leaders, empowered by technologies you couldn't dream of, but driven by the exact same human desires for control, for influence, for dominance, become similarly convinced of their own invincibility? What empires of corporate influence, political power, or economic dominance are being built, even now, on the same fragile foundation of ego and an unwillingness to heed reality? Your life, from coronation to confinement, is a mirror, reflecting both the seductive, almost divine power of ambition and the catastrophic cost of letting it blind you completely. Greatness, to be sure, requires vision, audacity, and unparalleled courage, but sustaining it demands something far rarer: humility, adaptability, and a sober, profound respect for the forces beyond your control. The echo of your ambition resonates through the ages, a cautionary tale whispered on the wind, a stark reminder of the precipice you danced upon. You yourself noted the terrifying proximity of two extremes. From the sublime to the ridiculous is but a step. Step wisely. In the end, it wasn't the world that broke him, but the belief that he was unbreakable.